On the day my billionaire grandfather's will was read, I expected that at the very least, I would be remembered with some respect. My father received a grand mansion. My brother, Ethan, was handed stocks worth millions. My aunts walked away smiling with land, luxury properties, and even yachts. When my turn came, the lawyer didn't read out a fortune. Instead, he quietly placed a single old rusted key into my palm. My father let out a smug smile. "A falling apart garage," he said coldly. "That's all you're worth, Sophia." Ethan exploded with laughter, his voice bouncing off the walls of the silent room. The shame hit me like fire under my skin. I kept my head down, but that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I squeezed the key so hard it dug into my skin. If this was truly all my grandfather had left me, then I needed to understand why. I drove across town toward the industrial district. The metal door screamed as it opened, my flashlight shaking in my hand. What stood before me made my heart freeze. There was no way my billionaire grandfather had left me this without a reason. Earlier that day, the lawyer's office had smelled of aged leather and polished wood. It was the kind of place where family legacies were settled and futures quietly torn apart. I sat straight in my chair, hands folded tightly, pretending not to hear the hushed whispers moving through the room. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mr. Harper, the family lawyer, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His voice was slow and careful as he began reading the will my grandfather had prepared. "To my son, Richard Carter, I leave the family estate and all properties connected to it." My father leaned back, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Soft murmurs of approval filled the room. "To my grandson, Ethan Carter, I leave the investment portfolio valued at approximately $25 million. Ethan straightened his expensive tie and smirked. He glanced at me from the corner of his eye, his expression full of victory. "Looks like we know who Grandpa trusted with the real money," he whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I clenched my hands under the table, my nails pressing into my skin. The lawyer continued. "One by one, my aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins received land, properties, and luxury items, including a yacht." Each announcement brought delighted gasps and proud smiles. Then everything went quiet. The lawyer lowered his voice and looked directly at me. "To my granddaughter, Sophia Carter, I leave a garage located in the industrial district, along with its key." The words hit me like a shock. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. My throat tightened, heat rushing to my face as the room fell silent. My father was the first to speak. He leaned forward, his smile sharp and cruel. "A garage?" he scoffed. "That makes sense." His chuckle turned into loud laughter. "Even your grandfather knew you'd never become anything, Sophia." Ethan bent forward, laughing uncontrollably. "Maybe it's full of broken tools and old tires," he said. "Perfect place for you, sis." My face burned as their laughter cut into me. Every sound reminded me of how small they believed I was. "Enough," my mother Linda whispered, placing her hand gently over mine. Her eyes shimmered with concern. "Don't listen to them. Your grandfather never did anything without a reason." But my father only shook his head. "A reason?" he said mockingly. "He gave away fortunes and left her a pile of junk. That's not a reason. That's an insult." Others nodded quietly, hiding their smiles behind polite expressions. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the key rested in my hand, heavy and flaky, leaving rust dust on my skin. The humiliation felt crushing. As the meeting ended, Ethan slapped my back. "Don't worry, Sophia. Maybe you can live in your garage. I'll stop by with some empty beer cans for decoration." My blood boiled, but I said nothing. I refused to give them the pleasure of seeing me fall apart. Outside, the summer air felt thick and suffocating. I stared at the key again. It wasn't just metal. It felt like a mark of shame burned into my palm. Still, beneath that shame, something small sparked inside me. My grandfather had believed in me once, when no one else had. Maybe there was more to this garage than my father and brother could see. "I'll find out," I whispered quietly. "I'll prove them wrong, Grandpa." The next morning, I woke up in my tiny apartment to my alarm ringing at 6 a.m. The ceiling above me was cracked, a web of old lines that hadn't been painted in years. I climbed out of bed and stepped around mismatched furniture, all secondhand pieces people gave away because they didn't want them anymore. This was my life. While Ethan drove his shiny sports car to his corner office at a respected law firm, I squeezed onto a crowded bus heading to downtown Chicago. My job as a junior secretary at an insurance company paid just enough to afford rent and instant noodles. Every day, I sat at a small desk surrounded by dull gray partitions, filing endless paperwork and answering phones for managers who barely remembered who I was. During lunch, I ate alone in the break room while my coworkers laughed about expensive trips and showed off designer handbags. I held onto a chipped coffee mug. Whenever Ethan's name came up during family conversations, his promotions, his luxury apartment, his glamorous girlfriend, my parents' faces lit up with pride. When the topic turned to me, my father only sighed, shaking his head like I was a lifelong disappointment. I told myself it didn't matter. But every glance, every quiet comment, slowly wore me down. That evening, as I walked home beneath the dimming city lights, I caught my reflection in a shop window. My eyes looked tired. My hair was pulled into a loose, messy bun. My shoulders drooped, weighed down by exhaustion. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. When I reached the apartment, my two roommates were sprawled on the couch, laughing as they watched old sitcom reruns. I slipped quietly into my small bedroom, closed the door, and sank onto the bed. From the nightstand, I picked up the rusted key my grandfather had left behind. The metal felt cold and rough against my skin. Memories rushed back. Long summer evenings on the porch of his farmhouse, the sound of cicadas humming in the dark, Grandpa leaning back in his chair, his deep voice spinning stories about his younger days. "Life is an adventure, Sophia," he used to say. "Don't be afraid of failing. Be afraid of never taking the first step." Back then, I'd smiled politely, never thinking those words were meant for someone like me. But now, as I held that key, his voice seemed to echo inside my chest. Ethan's laughter still rang in my ears. My father's cruel smile burned in my thoughts. They believed I was nothing. And maybe they were right. Everything about my life seemed to support it. No money, no status, no real place in the family. But what if Grandpa had been giving me an opportunity? What if this key wasn't meant to humiliate me, but to open something else entirely? My fingers tightened around it, my heartbeat picking up speed. Tomorrow, I would return to the same dull office, greet clients with forced smiles, and come home to walls with peeling paint. But tonight was different. Tonight, I could choose to face whatever this key belonged to. I held it under the glow of the lamp. Rust stained my fingertips, but beneath the corrosion, the metal was firm and strong. "Maybe that was your message," I whispered into the quiet room. "You believed in me, didn't you? Even when no one else did." The distant hum of the city filled the silence. My chest tightened with fear mixed with resolve. For the first time in years, I felt the faint pull of a purpose I couldn't yet explain. Later that night, I stepped off the bus into the heavy air of the West Side Industrial District. The glow of the city faded behind me as I walked deeper into the area. Streetlights flickered weakly, throwing broken shadows across abandoned warehouses lined up like forgotten giants. With every step, the world grew quieter. No cars, no voices, only the lonely sound of wind moving through rusted steel. The key felt heavy in my pocket, like a burden I couldn't escape. My father's words echoed in my head. "You're nothing, Sophia." Ethan's laughter followed, sharp and relentless. I clenched my fists, my pulse racing. I could have turned back. I could have gone home, crawled into bed, and pretended the garage didn't exist. But the humiliation gnawed at me, and something stubborn rose inside my chest. If this was my inheritance, I would face it. Even if all that waited inside was dust and rats, I would see it for myself. I needed to prove that I wasn't afraid. After nearly an hour of walking, I found the building. It stood low and forgotten, its concrete walls cracked and streaked with grime. Above the heavy iron door hung a faded sign with a single word on it. Carter. My last name. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Grandpa had left this to me. Just me. The street around me was empty. The only sound was the soft click of my shoes against the pavement as I stood there, staring at the door. My heart pounded hard as I pulled the key from my pocket. Rust crumbled into my palm, leaving red-brown stains on my skin. I whispered softly, as if he could hear me. "Why, Grandpa? Why this place?" The key slid into the lock more smoothly than I expected. I paused, my hand shaking against the cold metal. My thoughts screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to walk away and forget this garage ever existed. But another voice pushed through the fear. Grandpa's voice. "Don't fear failure, Sophia. Fear never taking the first step." I turned the key firmly. The lock broke free with a dry metallic snap. As I pushed the door open, the hinges groaned loudly, the sound echoing down the empty street like a warning. A wave of stale air rushed over me, thick with dust, oil, and years of neglect. I switched on my phone's flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the darkness. My stomach twisted as the light moved across rotting wooden crates and rusted tools scattered over a cracked concrete floor. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like curtains, drifting slightly in the air. "So this is it," I muttered, bitterness shaking my voice. "This is my inheritance." A scrapyard, a place forgotten by time. Still, something inside me urged me forward. I stepped deeper into the garage, each footstep sending dust swirling into the air. The silence felt heavy, almost watchful, as if the shadows themselves were waiting. Then my flashlight caught something near the far wall. A smaller metal door, bolted shut, partly hidden behind a stack of old crates. My pulse jumped. It didn't look like the rest of the garage. It looked planned, important. I moved closer, brushing cobwebs aside, and froze when I saw the brass plaque attached to the door. My heart skipped. The engraving was worn but clear. My birthday. My legs nearly gave out. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. Grandpa hadn't just left me a garage. He had left me a message. I stumbled back a step, breathing fast, staring at the door that seemed to call my name. For the first time since I'd touched that cursed key, the humiliation faded, replaced by fear, excitement, and the terrifying feeling that whatever waited beyond that door would change my life forever. My hands trembled as I pressed the flashlight against my chest to steady it. The brass plaque caught the light, the numbers of my birthday glowing softly. This wasn't meant for anyone else. It was meant for me. I swallowed hard, wiping my damp palms on my jeans, and reached for the lock. It was an old combination dial, stiff and rusted. My heart hammered as I turned the numbers. Month, day, year. Each click echoed loudly in the silence. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, there was a quiet click. The lock released. I froze, staring at it, barely breathing. My hand hovered over the bolt. What if this was a cruel trick? What if all that waited inside was mold, rats, or nothing at all? Then Grandpa's voice returned in my mind. "Don't fear failure, Sophia. Fear never taking the first step." I pulled the bolt. The small door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Cold, damp air rushed upward, carrying the smell of earth and metal. My flashlight shook as I aimed it down the steps. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I stepped forward. One step, then another. Behind me, the iron door slammed shut, sealing me inside. The deeper I went, the colder the air became, until goosebumps spread across my skin. My breath turned visible in the stale darkness. The stairs ended in a pitch-black basement. I swept the flashlight across the room and stopped cold. The beam landed on rows of iron shelves, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. Something reflected the light with a dull, yellow shine. My heart skipped. I blinked, sure my eyes were lying to me. Gold. Not a few pieces, not a handful. Hundreds of solid gold bars were stacked in perfect order, stretching as far as my light could reach. The surfaces of the bars caught the light and shimmered, almost as if they were mocking me with their beauty. My knees gave out. I stumbled forward, reaching with shaking hands. The moment my fingers touched one bar, its heavy, icy weight nearly pulled my arm down. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. This can't be real, I whispered. But it was. Everywhere I turned, there was gold. Not trash, not a forgotten garage. This was a hidden vault, worth more than anything I had ever imagined in my life. I staggered toward the center of the basement, where a small iron table stood alone. On top of it rested a single envelope, sealed with dark red wax. My name was written across the front in my grandfather's unsteady handwriting. For Sophia. My throat tightened. Tears burned my eyes as I grabbed it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Sophia, if you are reading this, you have found the vault. What you see here is not a gift meant for you to keep. It is a test. This gold belongs to those who need it more than you do. Your task is to deliver it to the 5 addresses listed on the racks. Everything you need has already been prepared. I am sorry for placing this weight on your shoulders, but I believe you are the only one strong enough to carry it. Be brave, Sophia. I have always believed in you. Grandpa. The letter slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. Not mine, not a reward, a burden. I collapsed onto the cold concrete, clutching my head as my entire body began to shake. For years, my family had treated me like I was worthless, ignored, mocked, left behind. And now, sitting in front of me, was the power to silence all of them, to buy respect, to buy freedom, to live the life I had only ever dreamed of. Mansions, security, a future where no one could look down on me again. Every desire glittered from those shelves, and Grandpa was asking me to give it all away. I pressed my forehead against my knees, my tears soaking into the dusty fabric of my jeans. I didn't know whether to laugh, scream, or break apart completely. The vault felt smaller somehow, its quiet glow demanding an answer from me. Why, Grandpa, I whispered into the stillness. Why me? There was no reply, only my own voice bouncing back off the concrete walls. But one line from the letter echoed louder than anything else. I believe in you. I closed my eyes, the glow of the gold burning behind my eyelids. For the first time in my life, I held something truly powerful, and it was also the heaviest weight I had ever carried. The envelope lay crushed beside me, its message carved deep into my thoughts. This gold is not yours to keep. Deliver it. I believe in you. Slowly, I lifted my head. My eyes burned as I stared at the shelves. Rows and rows of gold bars shimmered back at me, each one shining like a promise. My breathing came fast and shallow. Not mine, I whispered bitterly. Then whose is it, Grandpa? Why give me this, only to tell me I can't keep it? I forced myself onto my feet, my legs trembling. My flashlight swept across the vault again, setting the gold ablaze with light. I stepped forward and lifted a bar with both hands. It was heavier than I expected, its cold surface biting into my palms. I raised it close to my face, my heart racing. 1 bar, I murmured, my voice unsteady. Just one. Who would ever know? Images flooded my mind. Me walking into a luxury car dealership, dropping cash on a gleaming red sports car. Me stepping into Ethan's law office, my heels clicking on marble floors as his confident smile vanished. Me handing my father the deed to a mansion larger than his, forcing him to swallow his cruelty. My grip tightened, my nails scraping against the metal. My chest rose and fell rapidly. For the first time in my life, I could be more than nothing. Then, without warning, another image surfaced. Grandpa's eyes, calm, kind, the way he looked at me when I was a little girl. His voice cut through the storm in my head. Wealth isn't what you keep for yourself, Sophia. It's what you're willing to give away. I dropped the bar. The loud clang echoed through the vault. My hands shook uncontrollably. Why, Grandpa? I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking. Why me? Do you know what it's like to be laughed at every single day? To be treated like garbage by your own family? My vision blurred with tears. You had everything, and you leave me this choice. I grabbed another bar and hugged it tightly to my chest, as if it could steady me. Its weight was crushing, yet intoxicating, pressing into me like both a promise and a punishment. I could run right now. I could disappear and find a buyer on the black market, turn just 1 bar into millions. I wouldn't have to live in that suffocating apartment anymore. No more instant noodles, no more secondhand clothes, no more sitting alone while everyone else celebrated their success. Maybe he was wrong about me, I whispered, my voice shaking. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I don't care about being noble or selfless. The vault remained silent, but the memory of Grandpa's handwriting cut straight through me. Be strong, Sophia. I believe in you. I pressed my back against the freezing wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor again, still clutching the gold bar. My thoughts spun wildly, pulled hard between want and responsibility. Every time I imagined keeping the gold, a rush of relief washed over me, a picture of freedom I had never known. But every time I heard Grandpa's voice in my head, guilt struck deep and sharp. I buried my face in my hands, tears soaking into my palms. I don't know what to do, I whispered, completely broken. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The air was bitterly cold, and the weight of the vault seemed to press down on me until breathing felt difficult. Finally, with shaking hands, I placed the bar back onto the shelf. The sound of metal touching metal felt final, like a door slamming shut. I wiped my face with my sleeve, my chest aching. If this is what you wanted, Grandpa, I'll try, I murmured. But God help me, I don't know if I can. I stood up, unsteady but resolved, and looked at the envelope again. The list of addresses written inside seemed to pull at me with a force of its own. 5 destinations. 5 heavy responsibilities. I clenched the paper tightly in my fist. The temptation still burned fiercely inside me, but beneath it, small and fragile, something else began to grow. Hope. The paper felt heavier than the gold itself. 5 addresses written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. 5 places that would decide whether I honored him or betrayed him. I loaded one crate into the back of a borrowed truck, my heart beating so loudly it drowned out the noise of the city. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected flashing red and blue lights or a dark car following close behind. The fear of being stopped by the police sent chills through me. What would I even say? Yes, officer, I'm just transporting millions in unmarked gold bars. The first address took me north into the Adirondack Mountains. The drive lasted 3 long days. Every stop for gas felt dangerous. I locked the truck, but my eyes never stopped drifting back to the cargo. When strangers stood too close, sweat broke out across my skin. By the time I reached the small cabin hidden deep among the pine trees, my nerves were completely worn down. Snow crunched under my boots as I dragged the heavy crate up the creaking porch. I knocked, and the door slowly opened. An elderly man stood there, his sharp eyes clouded with age. "Henry?" I asked, my breath turning white in the cold air. He nodded slowly, gripping his cane. "William's granddaughter?" he asked. His voice cracked, thick with memory. I pushed the crate inside, my arms trembling from the strain. When Henry saw the gold, his face didn't light up with greed. Instead, it softened with sadness. He ran his weathered hand gently across the bars, touching them like old relics rather than treasure. "During the war," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Your grandfather saved our entire platoon," Henry said quietly. "He took a bullet and never once called himself a hero. But to us, he was everything." Tears burned in my eyes as Henry tightened his grip around my hand. "You have his eyes, Sophia," he said softly. "The eyes of someone who will do what's right, no matter how hard it is." I couldn't find my voice. I only nodded, my throat locked tight, before stepping back out into the freezing air. The second address couldn't have felt farther away. Boston. I abandoned the truck, terrified it would draw attention, and chose the train instead. The gold was wrapped in thick layers of cloth, disguised as ordinary cargo. Still, every creak of the train wheels and every passing glance from another passenger made my body tense. I sat pressed close to the crate for 10 sleepless hours, sweat trickling down my spine despite the winter cold. When the Boston skyline finally appeared, sharp and modern against the horizon, my chest ached with relief. The address led me to a sleek glass high-rise overlooking the harbor. Inside, a man in his 60s stood waiting, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. "Charles Donovan," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm but calm. "I've already opened the crate." The gold reflected under the office lights. Donovan's eyes softened, and a quiet, sad smile crossed his face. "That's William's way," he murmured, always keeping his word, no matter how difficult it was. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and motioned for me to sit. "Your grandfather started with nothing," he said, "a car mechanic with grease on his hands. But he built his empire not by destroying others, but by honoring promises. Integrity, he used to say, was a man's greatest wealth." He slid a folded note across the desk. My heart raced as I opened it. In Grandpa's familiar handwriting were just 5 words. "Keep your integrity, Sophia. Gold is secondary." My vision blurred with tears as I held the note. Donovan leaned forward slightly. "He chose you for a reason," he said gently. "Don't ever doubt that." That night, as I boarded the train back, I pressed the note against my chest. Henry's words about heroism and Donovan's words about integrity clashed and blended with Grandpa's steady voice in my mind. Still, temptation crept in. Each time I glanced toward the next crate waiting in the storage car, I imagined running, vanishing, living the wealthy life I had always been denied. But every time that thought surfaced, Henry's voice cut through it. "You have his eyes." And Donovan's words followed. "Gold is secondary." And Grandpa's voice, firm and unwavering. "I believe in you." I closed my eyes as exhaustion finally pulled me under, the train rumbling through the night. Ahead of me were still 3 addresses, 3 responsibilities heavier than any gold bar, and I wondered if I would be strong enough to carry them all. The desert sun showed no mercy as I drove toward Tucson, Arizona. The truck rattled along the empty highway, its engine groaning beneath the weight of the remaining crates. Sweat soaked through my shirt, stinging my skin. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every mile felt like punishment. I hadn't slept properly in days. Temptation haunted my thoughts, and my body ached from lifting crates heavier than I ever imagined. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. Grandpa's list burned in my pocket like a mark I couldn't escape. The nursing home sat at the edge of the city, a low building surrounded by wildflowers. I dragged the crate inside, nearly collapsing from the effort. A nurse with silver-streaked hair froze when she saw the gold. "William," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He never forgot us." Her name was Susan, the director of the home. She guided me into a common room where elderly residents sat in worn chairs. Some stared quietly out the windows. Others played chess with trembling hands. When Susan spoke my grandfather's name, the room fell silent. An elderly man reached for my hand, tears streaming down his lined face. "He gave us blankets in winter, food when we had nothing," he said. "He never visited, but we prayed for him every night." I bit my lip until I tasted blood, my chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. Tears blurred my vision as I placed the gold into Susan's hands. "It was his wish," I whispered, my voice breaking. That night, I stayed for dinner. The meal was simple, mashed potatoes and stew, but it tasted richer than anything I had eaten in years. Laughter filled the room as stories about my grandfather flowed from every corner. Pride swelled inside me. So did pain. How could I ever live up to a man like him? The next morning, I headed for Chicago, the final address. My body begged for rest, but adrenaline kept me moving. The Horizon Charity Foundation rose in the city center, its glass walls reflecting the cold sky. I dragged the final crate through the shining lobby, sweat pouring down my temples. The receptionist's polite smile faltered as I placed Grandpa's letter on the desk. Minutes later, I was led into the office of Mr. Carter, the foundation's director. When I said my grandfather's name, his expression froze. He reached out, touching the gold with shaking hands, his eyes shining with tears. "William Carter was one of our most discreet founders," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "He built hospitals, funded scholarships, and supported disaster relief efforts, always in silence. Never for praise, never for recognition, always for people who needed help." Mr. Carter showed me thick folders filled with documents, photographs of children receiving care in remote hospitals, students holding diplomas with proud, hopeful smiles, families standing in disaster zones, clutching food and supplies. Every page carried my grandfather's influence, even though his name was nowhere to be found. "You brought the final piece," Carter said quietly. "Not just the gold, Sophia, but your grandfather's legacy." My legs nearly gave out. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. I lowered the crate to the floor, but my hands refused to stop shaking. When I stepped outside, a cold drizzle greeted me. Chicago's streets blurred as rain streaked across my vision, neon signs bleeding into the wet pavement. I stumbled back to the truck, collapsed into the driver's seat, and finally let the sobs pour out. It was finished. All the gold was gone. Every last bar. And yet, instead of relief, there was an emptiness inside me that felt endless. I drove without direction until I realized where I was. Back in the industrial district, back in front of the rusted garage door. Rain slammed down, soaking me through. I pushed the door open and made my way down into the basement. The shelves that once shone with unimaginable wealth now stood bare, empty. Their shadows stretched across the floor like skeletal fingers. I sank down, wrapping my arms around my knees, rocking slightly like a child. My voice cracked as I whispered into the hollow space. "I did it, Grandpa. I gave everything away. And now I have nothing left." The silence answered me. My sobs echoed off the concrete walls. For most of my life, I had been mocked, dismissed, treated like I didn't matter. And for a brief moment, I had held the power to change all of that, to rewrite my story completely. But the gold was gone. The dreams were gone. and I was still the same person. Sophia Carter, tired, broke, invisible. Lightning flashed outside, lighting the basement in a pale, ghostly glow. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor, tears mixing with dust. I wasn't strong enough, I whispered. I just followed orders. And for what? I still have nothing. The despair felt crushing, like it might swallow me whole. Then, in that darkness, a memory surfaced. Grandpa's eyes, calm, kind, his voice steady and gentle. I believe in you. The words hurt more than anything else, because right then, I didn't believe in myself at all. The basement was silent, except for my uneven breathing. My eyes burned from crying. My body felt completely drained. I thought I might stay there forever, curled up beside the empty racks that once held a fortune. Then I heard it. A creak from above. The sound of the iron door opening sent a jolt through my chest. My flashlight shook as I aimed it toward the staircase. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate. A tall man in a dark suit appeared at the bottom step. His hair was streaked with silver, his eyes sharp, but calm. Sophia Carter, he said evenly. I pushed myself up, backing against the wall. Who are you? My voice cracked, part fear, part anger. How did you get in here? He inclined his head slightly. Arthur Hayes, your grandfather's private lawyer. I've been waiting for this day. My stomach dropped. Private lawyer? Grandpa already had one. Mr. Harper. He read the will. Arthur gave a faint smile. Harper handled the public matters. I handled what William chose to keep hidden. He gestured around the room. This vault was never about inheritance. It was about you. I shook my head, dizzy. How did you know I'd come back? He stepped closer and placed a leather briefcase on the iron table. Your grandfather instructed me to observe your journey. This place is equipped with a silent alarm. When you opened the vault weeks ago, I knew. And when the final gold left these shelves, I knew you would return. The room spun. My legs felt weak. So, all of this was planned? Arthur nodded and opened the briefcase. Inside was a thick envelope sealed with red wax. He slid it toward me. This is for you, to be opened when the task was complete. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Grandpa's handwriting filled the page. Dear Sophia, if you are reading this, then you chose the path I hoped you would. Integrity over greed. Compassion over pride. The gold was never meant for you to keep. It was meant to test your strength. To see if you could carry responsibility, not just wealth. You did not fail me. You fulfilled my final wish. And now you are ready. My breath caught as Arthur laid several documents on the table. Bank account records, real estate deeds, stock certificates, all bearing my name. Your grandfather created a trust many years ago, Arthur said calmly. It is valued at $10 million. It belongs to you now. The words hit me like thunder. My knees gave out and I collapsed into the nearest chair, clutching the papers. $10 million? I sobbed. Why? Why didn't he just give this to me from the beginning? Arthur's expression softened. Because William wanted you to understand that money alone has no meaning. You had to prove to yourself that you were worthy of it. And you did. I covered my face as my body shook with sobs. For weeks, I had lived on the edge of breaking, torn between temptation and exhaustion. And now I understood. Grandpa had been guiding me the entire time. You believed in me, I whispered into the silence. And for the first time in my life, I believed in myself too. Arthur closed the briefcase. This trust is more than money, Sophia. It's a responsibility. Use it the way he would have, quietly, selflessly, with courage. I nodded through tears, gripping the documents like they were the only thing keeping me upright. When Arthur finally left, I stayed in the basement a while longer. The shelves were empty, but I no longer felt hollow. The darkness didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like a place I had outgrown. At last, I climbed the stairs. Outside, the rain had stopped. City lights shimmered against the wet pavement. I stood in the doorway of the garage, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I was Sophia Carter, heir not just to my grandfather's fortune, but to his faith in me, his values, and his legacy. And as I stepped into the moonlit street, I swore that I would live every day worthy of it.